It sees you.
Colin? Hey kid. Dad's voice came out of nowhere, bringing me back to reality in the passenger seat of his dusty old pickup. The sun was setting through the trees as we careened down the winding road up to the cabin. The papers in my lap rustled, words scrolled messily all over the homework as he pushed them down into the floorboards. The hell you bothering with that for? Because I gotta bring my grade up before the end of the year, I muttered back, trying to gather the papers off the dusty floorboard. If I don't have at least a B, then I won't qualify for a college grant. Oh, hell, this again. You don't need to go to college. You can work with me and your uncles, make plenty of money that way, he said, his eye starting to twitch. I recognized that twitch. He was already tweaking, and we weren't even 10 minutes out from the damn cabin. I don't think I was even mad or scared anymore. Just tired. Tired of dealing with his bullshit every day, in and out. College couldn't come soon enough. I held my tongue, not wanting to piss him off more before we even get to the cabin. Once I was there, I could disappear for a bit into the woods and not have to deal with his crap. Just have to keep going. We drove on in silence, neither of us saying anything, as I just looked at the papers in my lap. I was afraid to even write anything else, in case he decided to just throw it out the window next time. Instead, we sat, saying nothing, waiting for the cabin to appear up ahead. Finally, it did. An old run-down log cabin in the middle of the Georgia wilderness. Nothing special about it, not from the outside anyway. 2 bedrooms, a small kitchen connected to the living room, and a creaky old porch with broken floorboards that you could fall through. If you're not careful, you would think, with all the money Dad and my uncles supposedly made, they would invest to keep the place from falling apart. But I knew they didn't think about that. No. Any money they made went towards their own selfish wants and needs. I was still wearing clothes I got when I started middle school years ago. But Dad made sure he had cool new toys to play with and a brand new truck back at home that was only for driving around town. If half the people he flaunted that wealth to knew how he made his money, they would see him a lot differently. Uncle Ray and Uncle Pete were already here. Looks like Ray had brought Sutter with him too. His son, who was a couple years older than me. Sutter was an all-right guy, way nicer than any of the others in this family, but he wasn't the brightest. There was a woman standing outside the front porch smoking too, but I didn't recognize her. The hell is that? Dad grumbled as we parked, throwing the emergency brake on the truck without slowing down and almost making me go through the windshield. His only response was to laugh when I shouted in fear, desperately trying to keep all my papers and book together. The woman out front waved. "Oh, you must be Petey's brother," she said as Dad got out, staring her up and down. She was, well, she fit the stereotype that Uncle Pete liked. Bad tattoos running up and down her legs, crooked teeth, and hair that looked like it had been fried from thousands of cheap bleachings. I'm Delma, though I'm sure little Petey's already told you all about me. She was cut off by Dad, budging his way past into the cabin, shouting, "Pete, Ray, where you at? And who's this whore on my porch?" I grabbed my bag, walking to the porch past Delma as she put her cig out on the ground, stomping on it to smother the ashes. She looked at me, sizing me up as I walked. I just shrugged at her. Sorry about him. He's a dick. She just smiled, demeanor changing as she started to laugh. Not the worst I've been called. The cabin smelled like mildew and dust, giving me a headache almost the moment I walked in. It was going to be a long weekend. "Hey, Colin," Sutter shouted, coming up the stairs from the basement below with a smile on his face. I waved, not really feeling up to any interaction. "Hey, I read that book you told me about. The one about the sky pirates. Damn, that was fun. I don't even like reading." "Yeah, it had a pretty cool world, didn't it?" I replied, smiling back. It wasn't usual I had someone to talk to about books or the shows I watched, so it was pretty nice that Sutter was actually into some of the stuff I was. At least the weekend might not feel so lonely. "Those books ain't gonna make you any money though," Dad grumbled, walking to the fridge and pulling out a beer before heading for the stairs, walking down while he opened the bottle. "Pete, I told you only family at work." "Sorry, brother." Pete's southern twang came from the basement, a tinge of fear in his voice as he realized Dad was there. She's persistent." "Well, you two ain't getting a bedroom to yourselves, you know," Ray shouted from below, cracking himself up as Pete laughed too. Delma came in, shooing away mosquitoes as she closed the door behind her. "This place ain't got AC?" she asked, looking at Sutter and I. We both shook our heads, pointing to a box fan in the corner. "They got a window unit downstairs to filter that out, but nothing up here," I said. "They think I'm gonna sleep in a crank lab to stay cool?" "Jesus," she mumbled, walking to the fridge. She opened the top freezer, nearly sticking her head in to cool off. "Ooh, Lord, how y'all put up with this heat? I feel ready to melt just standing up." "You get used to it after a while," Sutton said, turning back to me. "You gonna come work with us?" I think I'm gonna go for a walk, actually." "Don't tell Dad for me, please," I asked, begging with my eyes. If I have about a 10-minute head start, there's no chance Dad will come after me. Then I can just sneak back in after everyone's asleep tonight. "Grab some water and one of the sandwiches out of the fridge before you go. Don't want to be out there with nothing," he said, pointing over to where Delma was standing. She handed me 2 bottles of water and a sandwich before walking over to turn on the old television. Grainy signal coming in over the old antennae. "Thanks, I'll see you later," I said, heading back out the door. I started running down the path to make sure I got out of sight before Dad might come back up, and eventually took off into the surrounding woods. After about 30 minutes of walking, I finally reached the spot. I had run off here so many times over the years, I lost count. But it was a little clearing in the middle of nowhere, a couple of trees for shade, and a decent enough view of the path that I'll have advanced warning if Dad tries to find me. I settled in, putting my water aside and unwrapping the sandwich while I cracked open my book. Finally, peace away from the madness. It was nice, sitting out in the warm sun, getting lost in a book. Hell, even the sandwich was surprisingly good. Turkey, pepperoni, and provolone with Italian dressing. Sutter was a damn genius when it comes to making things taste good. Too bad his skills were being wasted on cooking shitty crank with a bunch of rednecks. Not long after I finished the sandwich, my eyes started getting heavy. Words blurred on the page, and I caught myself rereading the same sentence at least 3 times. I finally called it quits, sitting back against the tree in a spot where I was hidden from the path, and took a nap. The most awful sound woke me from my nap. Like a train running through a mile of sheet metal at a top speed, screeching the entire time as it passed. I woke in fight or flight mode, ready to run towards the cabin or even back towards the city that was miles away if I needed to. Where the sound came from, I had no idea, but it was seemingly everywhere, coming from all directions at once. Covering my ears did nothing to block out the awful noise, and my head began to ache as the vibrations nearly made my eyes shake. I swear I could feel it in my teeth. Then it stopped just as suddenly, and as I looked up, a bright blue light was beaming into the sky, maybe a mile and a half away. My first thought was, for some reason, that Dad finally did something wrong, and the lab under the cabin blew up. Then I realized it probably wouldn't be making that color of light and felt disappointment. Damn, I feel kind of bad feeling like that, considering Sutter and Delma don't deserve to die that way. But holy shit, would it have been a relief if Dad did. Considering the sun was most of the way down, it was high time for me to get the hell back to the cabin anyway. Rustling around in my backpack, I found the lantern that I had brought just in case I stayed out too late. It wasn't anything expensive, but it lit up the surrounding area and had a decent enough battery life. I made sure to charge it before I left, so it should last me for the whole weekend if I'm smart about it. Time to start the journey home. Of course, I tripped on a tree root barely 10 minutes into the walk, nearly twisting my ankle. Not much I could do but shake it off, though my foot was screaming at me now. God, I just want to get to the couch so I can fall back asleep and try to be out again before sunrise. Hopefully Dad isn't still awake. My thoughts were interrupted by a noise somewhere ahead of me. To my right, I think. God, it's already so dark and my watch only reads 8 p.m. Gonna have to be careful and keep my bearings about me. Holding the lantern up, I try to get a better look at what may be ahead, wary in case I ran into a bobcat or something else that may be lurking. 1,000,000 volts shot right up my spine, stopping me in my tracks. The lantern light was reflecting off 2 massive white orbs in the darkness between 2 trees straight ahead of me. I could barely make out a silhouette, maybe 5 feet tall, a lithe, wiry body with long legs and arms, and the head at least twice the size as a normal human. Everything in me was going off, survival instinct telling me I should get the hell out of these woods. For a moment we stood there, and I swear we made eye contact. It was watching me. I was watching it. Both of us just waiting for the other to make the first move. Except I felt like if I was the first to move, it was going to bounce on me. Right now, I felt like I was just being observed. But at a moment's notice, something told me that this thing could pull me apart by barely lifting a finger. A whistle pierced the air around us, shrill, almost hurting my ears, but it broke the attention of the thing staring me down. It turned, suddenly bounding off into the distance, gone before I could get a better look at it. Didn't realize I was holding my breath until it all came rushing out right there. Fresh gulps of oxygen flooding my lungs and making my head spin. What the fuck? I whispered to myself, wondering out loud if what I saw was something natural or some undiscovered cryptid nobody's heard of. At this point, I'll take running into the bobcat. I didn't stop to think about it for too long. Nope, just going to run my ass back to the cabin as fast as possible. Even if Dad was there waiting for me, a beating from him would honestly be way less terrifying than whatever the hell that was just now. The skies above were extra dark tonight, not a single star, or even the moon to light my way, as clouds covered everything. It just made the feeling more eerie as I walked back, and every little rustle or twig breaking in the woods around me made me nearly jump out of my damn skin. Finally, I made it back. The porch light was off surprisingly, but the light in the main room was on, and I could hear shouting from inside. I didn't even try to be subtle. At this point, the nagging fear in the back of my mind was screaming at me to get the hell inside where it was safe. Granted, it wasn't safe anyway, but at least there wasn't that thing in there. "The hell you been, boy?" Dad shouted almost the nanosecond I was through the door. Wincing, I closed it fast behind me, looking out the nearby window to see if any kind of creature had followed me all the way back. Maybe I was being paranoid at this point, but that thing, whatever it was, shook me to my damn core. "Fell asleep, sorry," I muttered, still looking outside for a moment before pulling the curtains down. Maybe it was a one-time run-in, but just in case, I swear I could feel those big white eyes still glaring at me from the darkness. Whatever was out there wasn't going to just leave us alone that easily. "Fell asleep? Asleep?" He was screaming at me now. I could see the others behind him as he got up from the ratty couch, storming towards me with fury in his eyes. "Come on, Danny, let the kid be a kid." Ray mumbled, trying to come to my aid but barely making a difference as Dad swung a hand. It stung, hitting me right on the cheek. Not the worst hit he had ever given me, but shit, it still hurt enough to make me wince. Dad turned to his brother almost immediately after landing the blow, raising his fist to him now. "Don't you dare tell me how to parent my kid," he said, smacking him in the back of the head. Ray didn't say anything after that, just a brief grumble of "sorry" before sitting back and sipping his drink. "There's something out there," I said. Barely loud enough for anyone to hear. Dad must have taken it as backtalk though, because he raised a hand again, ready to smack the shit out of me another time before I spoke up even louder. "No, there's something out there. Something followed me in the woods." "The police?" Pete asked, sitting up and moving towards the front window to peer out now. "No, it wasn't a person. Least I don't think it was," I muttered back. Dad stared at me for a moment, sizing me up like he was deciding if I was telling the truth or just trying to fuck with him. At this point, you would think he would know better, but he was always looking for another excuse to beat my ass, so I'm not surprised. Thump! Something hit the front door hard, making it shake in the frame. If they were doubting me, it almost immediately disappeared. The others practically jumped off the couch, and Dad was heading for the shotgun in the corner within moments. "Fuck was that?" Pete asked, moving closer to the window. Standing as close to the edge of the window pane as he could, he moved the curtains with a fingertip, trying to see what could be out there in the dark. Dad was already at the entryway now, cocking the shotgun and getting ready to heft it to his shoulder. He practically kicked the heavy wooden door down before storming out onto the porch, holding the shotgun up and at the ready. Pete walked up behind, flipping the front light on so we could see a little further into the darkness. But the dingy yellow glow barely made a dent in the inky darkness beyond. Hell, the tree line was barely visible. Another thump caught our attention as Dad stood on the step just at the edge of the porch. Pete and I stared from the doorway. Delma, Sutter, and Ray all gathered near the windows, trying to catch a glimpse of what might be beyond our flickering porch light. There, standing right on top of Dad's truck, was the same figure I had seen in the woods not even an hour ago. No, wait. This one was taller. It took me a second with the light to realize this thing was towering over the truck, standing right beside it, with glowing white eyes reflecting the dim light that barely reached it. It had to be maybe 9 feet tall, over twice what the other one was in the woods. Maybe this one was. Maybe it was full grown. Or maybe they just came in different shapes and sizes. Dad noticed it and fired off a shot, illuminating the darkness for a brief moment. In it, I got the clearest look at the creature yet for just a second. It was tall, that's for sure. The height was so oddly proportioned, though, that it looked like some caricature art of a person you'd see in a newspaper cartoon. The legs took over half of its length, stretching almost to the top of the truck before its torso finally began. The torso itself looked like a malnourished child, almost frail. Bones could be seen jutting through tight, leathery skin, but they didn't look like any anatomy I had ever seen. All criss crossed across it with no semblance of symmetry. Arms long enough to reach its knees without bending ended in huge, clawed fingers that looked like they could tear flesh apart in an instant. The face, though. God, the face. Skin was a deep mottled gray that looked like dead flesh and fading bruises. It had a mouth, but it was like it had been turned 180 in the center, going straight up the middle of its face between the huge white eyes. The eyes, well, they were almost filmed over. And if it was human, I would assume it had awful cataracts. Practically blind is what it should have been. But instead, I could feel those eyes boring into me, watching as it stared us all down from the other side of the truck. It was gone again in an instant as the flash of the gun faded away. Dad fired off another shot, and I could hear it roar. A metallic screech that sounded like cars colliding at hundreds of miles per hour. It made my head hurt, like my ears were going to bleed just listening to it. But suddenly, it was over, just as soon as it began. "Get inside," Dad said, motioning me back through the doorway. "Get inside." I don't think I've ever seen genuine fear in this man's eyes. But here we are. He moved faster than I've ever seen too, running through the door right as the creature out there roared again. This time, though, it sent a message that was even louder. Dad's truck was thrown, going at least 15 feet in the air without so much as a warning that it was leaving the ground. As he slammed the door shut behind us, I could see the headlights come on. Alarm already blaring from the first impact as it fell on top of Pete's car, crushing it with a loud crunch. Dad stood against the door, holding the shotgun to his chest and staring straight ahead. If I wasn't so fucking terrified by what we all just witnessed, I would be taking in his reaction with glee, considering all he's put me through over the years. I couldn't, though, because right now, I don't know if we're going to live to see the sunrise. "The hell just happened to my car?" Pete asked, swallowing so hard the thing outside probably heard it. He rushed around, pulling the curtains and blinds closed on all the windows like he was afraid they would see us freaking out. If one of them wanted to come in, a curtain certainly wasn't going to keep it from us. "The hell just throws a truck like that, Daniel?" "I don't know what the hell that was, Pete." Dad shot back, letting out a long sigh, finally. The gun was shaking in his hands, practically vibrating from fear. It wasn't alone either. "Petey, I'm scared. I want to go home." Delma was whispering as she grabbed onto Pete's arm, gripping so tight one of her nails began to draw blood. He pulled away, wincing as a vice grip wouldn't let him for a moment. "Well, car's done for. "So we're kind of fucked there, babe," he answered back. He was standing by the edge of the window, trying to get any kind of courage he could to look outside and see if there was any way out. The lights from both cars were flashing, shrill alarm coming from Pete's as Dad's car honked half-heartedly. As the headlights flashed through the window, sending a sliver of light through the crack in the curtain and into the living room. Through it, I could see Ray and Sutter sitting nearby, both frozen in fear. "Ain't nobody leaving with those things out there," Dad grumbled. That one was big, but there were others in the trees. I could see them for a second when the shot lit everything up. Might be half that thing's size, but probably just as deadly. "So what the hell do we do?" Sutter asked, so low it was hard to hear him. "We could try to run to my car," Ray offered, digging his keys out of a pocket. "Might be able to get away." "All of us won't fit," I muttered. For being a redneck crank brewer, Ray drove the most up-stereotypical car possible. A fucking Prius. Getting two of us in the damn thing was going to be asking a lot, but all six. Those things will be all over us before we can get the doors open. We just have to last until sunrise, then get the hell out of here. "You think they won't try to come in here?" Delma asked, her voice nearly a squeak. "We could hide in the basement," I offered. Dad said, shaking his head, before I could even finish the thought. "Too many fumes in there right now unless you're sleeping with a mask on, and we on have 4 of those." "Oh, good. So we either die from the things in the trees or meth fumes. Great," I retorted, muttering more to myself than anything. To my surprise, Dad didn't even try to get onto me for it. Instead, he just shook his head again, clutching the shotgun tighter. "Pete, Ray, pull the beds out of the rooms. We're going to barricade the doors and windows. Use any of the furniture you can." He started barking off orders instead, determined to take control after briefly showing weakness. "What are we going to sleep on?" Pete inquired. Not like any of us were going to be able to sleep knowing what was just beyond the thin walls of the cabin. Dad only shot him a glare, and he shut up almost immediately, moving off to bring furniture into the room alongside Ray. It took about 30 minutes, but they managed to cover both the door and the front windows with bed frames, mattresses, and a dresser from one of the bedrooms. We locked the bedroom doors and all set up camp in the middle of the living room, ready for a restless night, wondering if they could come after us at any moment. We kept the lights on, none of us daring to turn them out for fear that something would show up in the dark. I tried to read for a while, hoping to take my mind off the nightmare just outside our walls. But my eyes couldn't focus on any words on the page. Every slight rustle or gust of wind outside made me think this was it. They were going to bust through the barricade and eviscerate us all where we lay. Dad was sitting up in one of the chairs, facing the door, with shotgun at the ready. But what was the gun going to do at this point? At some point, I don't know when, I fell asleep. Despite the lights being on, I had the lantern right beside me, ready in case of any sudden need to run out into the darkness and away from here. Sleep had other plans, though. It came on suddenly, trying to read one moment when my eyelids suddenly began to dip, huge weights pulling them closed, even as fear tried to tell me not to let it.